Hi guys, this is Nadia from My Valley Crafts, and today I want to show you how to create this intricately woven wire pendant design. I've made a PDF tutorial for this, and there's also a full kit available with all the materials that you need. So if you pop over to my shop, you can have a look and see if there's anything that you fancy, because I quite often make kits and PDF tutorials for videos that I put up on here. And lastly, of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff all the time. Right, let's get started. So I've taken my base wire, and what I'm doing here is I've marked the base wire with a marker sort of halfway through, and I am using that mark to bend the wire in half. I'm just using a round nose plier here to give it a round shape, obviously at the bottom. This is to hang a stone from later, so it needs to be nice and round. And then what I'm doing next is I am bending the wire sideways so that I can then create the shape where the stone's going to sit in. So just using my chain nose pliers for that, and it's best if the loop is as small as possible because obviously you don't want it sticking up too much. So once you're finished, take your stone and see how big approximately you need to create the base shape. So I'm just squidging it a bit more sideways, very technical term that. And then I'm shaping the square wire. You can do this with round as well, by the way. It doesn't have to be square. I just like to use square for this sort of thing for frames, just because it has a little bit more integrity. It also is much easier to use when you're attaching wires to it. Because the wires tend to grip better because of the square profile, obviously, so that's what it's good for. So roughly make the frame just a fraction bigger than the stone itself, because you want a little bit of space to attach your wires to. And we're going then to bend the bail wires upwards and try and make them as parallel as possible. So I'm going some thuck here, but obviously you could make sure that it's the same size on each side. You want it symmetrical. Once they're parallel, I'm going to pick up my half round wire. Now if you don't have half round, this is 0.8, which is 20 gauge half round. If you don't have half round, you can use round as well. You can use 0.6, which is your 20 gauge round for that. And the reason why I like to use half round for this section is because it's got a nice wide profile, but it only has half the depth, obviously, because of the profile. So it looks beautiful and it sits beautiful as well, especially in the square wire. So continue. So we've got all of the wire wrapped up, and what we're going to do next is bend this out a little bit. So I'm just finishing off the end here, tucking it in, and then I'm bending it outwards. Just wrap it around and then trim off at the end at the bottom. And what I'm going to do next is bend out the profile a little bit, so the bezel a little bit, or the bail rather, so that when you hang the pendant later, it's central and the sort of pendulum effect is right in the middle, because if you don't do that, the pendant tends to flip over. So you need to kind of make sure the loop sits on top, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Right, so what we're going to do next is measure out the exact same length on each of the bail wires, because we want obviously it to be symmetrical. So this is roughly about a centimeter on each side. It can be longer, it can be shorter. Obviously your stone may be a different size to mine, so you'll need to adjust it for what you have. It's just so that each side has got the bend exactly where I want it to be, and then they're symmetrical on each side. A little bit fiddly at this stage, so I've saved you from it and I've cut the frame. So what we're going to do next is bend the wire inwards, so in essence creating like a diamond. So the mark that we've just put in place will help us to get it symmetrical. So next we're going to bend these wires outwards, obviously again you can mark it if you want. Again, I'm just going some thuck here, bending it sideways, and you can always adjust it later if it's not exactly square. The wire is quite forgiving at this stage as long as you don't mangle it too much, so you can straighten it out and try again. So next we need to secure that wire to the frame. So all I'm doing here is take my chain nose pliers. These are actually needle nose pliers, and they're great because they've got a really fine tip, and I can reach areas that I can't with my thicker sort of needle nose pliers, so these are great for that. And all I'm doing here is I'm wrapping this base wire around it about twice. So this is just once. You can go around it one more time to make sure it's nice and tight, and obviously do the other side. So next we need to attach our base wires for the weaves, and for that I'm picking up my 0.8, which is 20 gauge, and I'm feeding it through, and then I'm going in a clockwise direction. So I am wrapping this about once or twice just to make sure that it's nice and tight. It will be a little bit flimsy at this stage, so just you'll need to adjust a little bit with your pair of pliers later on. So about one wrap should suffice. You can try and do more, but obviously you need to make sure that you fit all these wires in this space. So I've attached 3 on each side, so, and I've removed, or not removed rather, I've moved all the other wires to the bottom. We're only going to be working with the wires that are sitting on top. So this is roughly about 17 centimeters long. I'm not sure what that is in inches actually. Need to work that out. And the first weave we're going to do is just a very simple block weave, and this is just to capture the stone in place. So what I'm doing here is I'm separating out the 3 base wires. Remember, it's the ones that are on the top. The ones that are underneath I've put in my left hand to move them out the way. So I'm wrapping around the first base wire once, and then I'm wrapping around wire 1 and 2, and I come in between wire 1 and 2 before wrapping around wire 2 and 3. And on the way back down, I'm simply wrapping around wire 2 once, and then wire 1 once. So this is one revolution of the weave. So we're going to repeat the first step, which is going around wire 1 and 2 once, and then we come in between wire 1 and 2, and we go around wire 2 and 3 once before coming back down and wrapping around wire 2 and wrap around wire 1. And this is the whole sort of weave you're going to do. So just keep going until you have enough of this weave that you need to attach the stone in place. So I obviously have a certain amount, but it might change for yours. All right, so for my size of stone, I have made 17 sets of this weave. And now what I'm going to do is put the stone in place, and I'm going to fold this weave over the side of the stone and then inwards towards the frame. So a little bit fiddly at this stage, so just take your time with that. And I'm feeding the wires through the frame from front to back like so, and I will then capture the stone in place. So feed that through and pull tight. So this will initially obviously create the setting. So pull that tight, and you need to try and make sure that the innermost wire to the stone is the first one that you attach. So basically in sequence. It's just, it doesn't really matter, but it just, you know, is a matter of, for me, and a matter of sort of tidiness. So try and do that. And once you've attached them, I've just used one wrap on each side. So this is attached, and it sort of flimsily keeps the stone in place, and it will be much better once you have done the other side, which is what we're going to do. So remember that it's the 3 top wires when we go around the other side as well. So once I have attached the other side, we're going to pick up another piece of 0.4 26 gauge wire, and we're going to be doing our first set of 2x5s. It's really basic, so what we're going to do here is wrap around the one base wire. In this case it is the top base wire 5 times, like so. It's a really simple weave, great for beginners if you haven't done this before. And then we're going to wrap around both base wires twice, and that's the whole weave. Then we're going to start fresh, so we're going to wrap 5 times around the top base wire, and then twice around. So we've got what we need here. So in this case I've made 13 sets. As I said earlier, you may need more, you may need less, depending on your stone size, so you need to adjust it. As long as it sort of roughly, sits around the stone like I'm doing here, you'll get the similar results. So what we're doing here is I'm coming in from behind with the weave. So I've wrapped it around the stone on the side, and I am pulling the base wire through the frame from behind and go around the stone. So next step obviously is to attach these wires. So I'm going to start with the outermost wire and wrap it around the frame once, and this will secure the weave in place. We're going to do the same with the other wire. So just feed it through the frame and then pull that tight, and that's nice and firm, and it keeps everything in place. So the next step is the remaining wire from the bottom. I'm going to just make it follow the initial weave that we've just created, and then what I'm going to do is I'm folding it in on itself and bring it through the frame in the corner, because I want to create a little detail with the wire itself. So I'm creating a little swirl. So the easiest way to do that is to kind of fold it in on itself like I'm doing here, and then I usually bring in a pair of round nose pliers. The finer tipped ones are much better for this, because you've got more control over your wires. And so what I'm doing then is I am using those pliers to kind of control the shape while I pull and tug very gently. It's quite easy to pull things out of shape if you accidentally pull too hard, so really take your time with that and kind of create a swirl with your round nose pliers and very gently pull on the base wire, and this will kind of slot it in place nicely. So next we're going to find a place anywhere in the frame where the wire, near where the wire comes through the frame. We're going to attach it. So just one wrap's enough, and then we pull that tight. Quite often I go it twice, but once is usually enough. And then we're going to do the other side exactly as we did now. So that's a mirror image of the two sort of steps we did with the weave and the swirl. So we've got exactly the same thing on each side, and the next step is to create another set of 2x5s with the two bottommost wires. Can you say that? The two wires that are nearest the bottom, let's put it that way. And we're going to create 2x5s with that. So just follow the same process, and the 5 wraps are on the bottom wire this time. So I've created my sets. So I've got 10 sets of my 2x5s. Remember, the open bit of this weave is at the top in this instance, and what we're going to do is create an anti-clockwise swirl. And I'm going to fold it in such a way, and just make sure that this one wire, you can see me moving it so that it's sort of on the inside of the swirl, because we're going to move it later to follow that weave. So make sure it sits on the inside. So we're going to fold that weave roughly above the first 2x5s we've made, to create a pattern, and then we're obviously going to bring it through the frame. So as the frame becomes more filled up with weaves, it's going to be harder to attach, so just find a place anywhere. So that's where the weaves are attached at the bottom here. And that's what it looks like so far. So now remember I was talking about this other wire, and we're going to take it and swirl it. I use my finger to kind of guide it as I twist this, again anti-clockwise. And just take your time with that. The slower you go, the more control you have over your wire. So in the beginning, I remember I used to panic and go super fast with all the weaves, and it really takes away from the control you have over the wire. So just take your time with that, and you'll find that it becomes much easier when you go slowly. So obviously attach that to your frame. So created a swirl, and now you need to find a spot somewhere. I've gone right below the sort of center and attached, and you can see that this wire is now sitting below all the other wires. So I've got 3 wires there, and then obviously the swirl wire here, and that's all of them attached. And now we're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. So we've done that, and it's looking good so far. And the next step is to create some more weaving. So grab another piece of 0.4 26 gauge wire, and because I like to weave my 2x5s with the solid part at the bottom, I flip my pendant to the back, and I am wrapping a 2x5. So basically the same thing again, 5 times around the bottom wire, and then twice around both wires. And this is obviously on the right hand side of your pendant if it's flipped the right side up. So continue until you've got enough of the weave. And I've made 7 sets for this because it's only traveling a short distance. You can see me here using my finger to guide the weave. It helps you have a little bit more control over where the wire falls. So I'm just kind of guiding it and shaping it. And as I'm pressing down, I'm kind of clamping it onto the pendant itself. And then obviously again, we're going to find a place to attach to the frame. And in this instance, I've actually gone and attached it to the cross members that we created earlier because there's no space left on the frame. So it doesn't really matter in this case where you're going to attach them to, because we're going to trim those wires off. So I've attached it, and we've got these wires coming out near the frame. That's what it looks like. And as I said earlier, trim these off and try and cap them off so that they won't snag on any clothing. So right near the stone itself, trim off that little bit of weaving wire as well. Don't need that anymore. And that's what it looks like so far. So you're going to do the same on the other side. So looking good. We're nearly halfway there. So we've got everything attached. So we're going to create a bit more weaving with the last 2 wires at the top. Again, 2x5s. So as I said earlier, I like to work with the solid section of that weave from the bottom because I find it easier. So I flip it to the back. And I start by attaching my wire with 5 wraps to the base, like so, and then obviously twice around both wires, same as we've done all along, and then continue obviously until you have enough of the length of that weave. So I've done both sides this time because we're going to do both the swirls at the same time. So I'm going to take the right hand side first, and I'm going to go in a clockwise motion this time. You can see me here twisting the weave, the empty section of the weave upwards a little bit, and this is to give it a certain profile, to make sure that it kind of sits on edge a little bit, if that makes sense. So I've done the one side, and obviously the other side is anti-clockwise because it's a mirror. And you can see me using my finger to guide the wire upwards, the weave upwards, so that it sits on edge, like so, anti-clockwise. And that way you can also control the sort of shape and size of the weave, the sort of design that you're making. And this is what it looks like. So you kind of made it symmetrical, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the 2 base wires from the right hand side and wrap them around the bail near the top to attach it securely. And if you find that difficult, use a pair of pliers. These are my trusty bent nose pliers, which I love using because they're useful for many things, especially pushing weaves together, because obviously of their bent profile, work quite nicely. So pull these tight. Sometimes the wires like to cross over, so you kind of need to fix those wires before you can continue. So that's what it looks like so far. So next we're going to create the other side, and it looks like we need to add 1 or 2 more 2x5. So I'm just going to extend that a tiny bit because we want to have that weave go a little bit longer than the first one, just to give it a visual effect. And later on, it's also going to be an area where we may want to attach beads. So I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to attach this to the bell as well. So again, same direction, same process as before. So just going to fold this around, and just 1 wrap is enough. I try and tuck the ends away as neatly as I can when I cut them, obviously, because you don't want them to get hooked on anything. So I tend to cut off my wires anywhere I can on the inside, away from areas that can potentially snag. You can then later adjust the weave with a pair of pliers if you're not happy with the way it sits. And that's what it looks like so far. So the next step is to get rid of those wires at the top. We're done with them, so remember to trim them off on the inside so that they don't get stuck on any clothing. So I'm going to trim off the 1.4 wire as well. And we're going to be left with just the top wire here. I tend to leave my wires. So what I've done here is I've taken the remaining base wires, and all I've done is kind of followed one of the weaves, and this really is just an accent. You can cut them off if you want. You don't have to do that. Sometimes it makes a piece too complex. I just like these little details because it can, for me, it adds a little bit of complexity. So I like to use single wires like that to follow a weave, just to give it a little bit more added detail. So that's what I've done on one side. So we're going to attach it to the frame here at the back, and then we're going to do the same on the other side. So I've attached, and you can see I've done the same at the bottom with the 1 single wire that we had left, and the same at the top. So next I've attached them to the frame. It doesn't matter where, because obviously these are just going to be cut off, so we're just trimming them off. So that's that done, and I have created a prong setting for an 8mm cubic zirconia stone. As I said, if you want a full kit, I've got these in my shop, so if you want to have everything, you can get that from there. And then all I'm doing is I am attaching that to the frame. Now I'm going to put a link for the tutorial how to make that setting below the video, so just check it out in the description. Once you've attached the stone, I'm just going to adjust everything to make sure it doesn't have any loose ends, and then I'm going to be adding my beads. I've already added them to the remaining 0.4 wire, and I'm going to now use that wire to add my beads, and I'm going to attach the beads by following that initial weave we made at the bail. Fold that through, and then find an area anywhere on the frame to attach that those beads in place, and make sure that the ends are tucked away. gone at the back here, and I'm going to attach it somewhere here. I'm going to trim off that remaining wire because I've decided we're not going to be using it. And lastly, we're using two wires, 0.4, to attach the remaining beads. So I've used two because I've used one main bead as the base and then the rest are split in half. And then obviously attach it anywhere near the bottom of the frame and on either side to make it follow the initial weave that we've created, and obviously attach it to the frame. So far so good. I've attached the weaving wire, and all I'm going to do now is trim off these wires to make sure that they don't get hooked on anything, as I said before. And then the last step obviously is just to create a little dangle. The kit I think that I've made has got a choice of different stones if you don't want an amethyst, so you get different types. I think I've got emerald and smoky quartz, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to fold this up, and that's it. So that's the whole pendant done. So that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this, and if you fancy it, why not pop over to visit me on my social media platforms. I've got Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And obviously, as I said earlier, I have a website as well. I do half round wire, I have gallery wire, PDF tutorials, and kits. And if you fancy it as well, why not join our artist group on Facebook? I'll pop a link below. So it would be nice to see you there because we're a fun bunch. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching, and